I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode. For those of you who don't know much about me and my story, welcome if you're new to the podcast. I just wanted to share with you before I introduce today's guest that with me and my anxiety journey, feeling sick was how it really first showed up for me when I was 4. But not long after that, I started to have a lot of difficulty with my breathing. I'd struggle to get a full breath, for my breath to feel satisfying in any way or easeful at all. And even today, here speaking with you today, many years later than the 4-year-old me where this all began, I still have my challenges, but there is a whole lot of improvement in my breathing and my understanding of the importance of the breath, not just the breath when we're meditating, but every single day, 20 to 30,000 times a day, because of today's guest. And she's a very special person in my life, and I'm about to introduce you. But I just wanted to say that if you do hear me every now and again do this, that is me probably over-breathing, but also that's just a symptom sometimes of my anxiety. And sometimes I get anxious when I'm podcasting because I care really very much about doing a really good job for you. And anxiety is just something that I bring with me wherever I go, even into the studio. So after a lifetime of having this kind of difficulty on and off, today's guest, Eva, who I'm about to introduce you to, she really helped to turn that around for me, and she's here today to help turn things around for you too. There's so much that I want to talk to Eva about, and I'm excited to introduce you to Eva Heraud, who I am very lucky to call a CrossFit buddy and a friend, and we get told off at CrossFit for chatting too much. And we were training together yesterday, and we were getting the side eye from our coach, and I said, "Oh, you should see us tomorrow. We're recording a podcast." So at least we get lots of uninterrupted time to talk today. Eva is the founder of Have Movement and is passionate about human movement, biomechanics, starting with the feet. She's passionate about design and the impact of how we breathe on our mental health and our physical health. She will disagree with me, but I'm going to say it anyway. What Eva doesn't know about human movement isn't worth knowing. Thank you so much, my beautiful friend, for joining me today for a chat on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jodie. I just feel honoured and humbled to be invited to have a chat with you today and to share what I've learned, I guess, over the years in the space of movement, breathing, and yes, of course, feet. So, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And it's really lovely for us to have a chance to chat uninterrupted without holding up the rest of the CrossFit class. So we'll see what we can do in the next 45 minutes. Look, I just want to start by saying thank you, Eva, because not only have you supported me with my own biomechanics and some of the sort of chronic kind of niggles that I've had real big problems with, and you've been the only one that's really been able to sort of help me come through to the other side. But when we started talking about breathing, I remember we were at CrossFit one day and you were working on your breath and you were undergoing breathing retraining, and my ears sort of really pricked up when I heard you say that. And you started to talk about what you were learning and what you were doing and the training that you were undertaking. And it led me to want to research more and read more, of course. And we've continued our chats about it. But I'm curious to know kind of what led you to this area of research and learning and breathing retraining for yourself as well.
Yeah, and it's been a journey for me in understanding my breathing in my own personal existence, and acknowledging that the way I use my breath is going to impact me physically and mentally. I did the journey of sort of looking at breath at the start of my studies. Sort of when I became a physiotherapist, we were taught the sort of standard physiology around breathing, and then I've worked in sort of respiratory hospitals in London, and then around sort of 12, 13 years ago, I specialized into Pilates and movement. And through that movement learning, and I describe it as going down many rabbit holes, being constantly curious and confused for a fair chunk of that time as well. But just that idea of we don't know what we don't know. And the people that I've met on this journey have taught me a lot as I've gone along, and those rabbit holes, as I've come up for air and taken a breath, have really just helped me to understand deeper, the sort of the physiology and the breathing side of things. So quick backstory, obviously with Pilates we're focusing on the core, and I have those like abbreviated finger signs up either side, because the core obviously extends to effectively the whole body, but we think about that torso region. And so in learning that, I did further training around understanding pelvic health and pelvic floor. And obviously the diaphragm is above the pelvic floor muscle, and obviously the diaphragm is the main breathing muscle. And through that journey, I have been looking at breathing as a way of helping my clients sort of develop that kind of efficient core use. And in the process of that constantly curious space, I came across Tess Graham, who's a physiotherapist working solely as a breathing educator. I think over 40 years that she was working in that space. I think she's just heading into retirement now, which is very sad. Yes. But yes, she was a real eye-opener for me. And I think where that took me, I had a client that was having some breathing difficulties, and I had heard of Tess through another Pilates instructor, and just reached out to her and sort of said, hey, these are some things that are going on. And she was really helpful and started to explain some things to me. And I hadn't intended to go down the path of being a breathing educator at that time. I was sort of working in that Pilates space, and I've been doing some further study around biomechanics and feet. And after chatting with her, I signed up for her course. I think it must have been within the same week, and the rest is history. I found her work just was like an aha moment, really, of how everything sort of fitted and made sense. And for me, the way our body works, our body and brain together, is this subtlety of movement. And I refer to the design of how we're made up, our biomechanics, the way our bones are. And none of it's by accident. It's all on purpose. And the diaphragm and the way that we breathe and the way the diaphragm works, and the fact that we have a nose and a mouth and a diaphragm and a pelvis, all these things are so interconnected. And that breath, through the work with her, I could see how something as simple as the breath, because it is pretty simple, right? We just breathe in and breathe out. Everyone's breathing. We're all doing it. But it's the subtlety of that breath, and how breathing as a chemical reaction, and the purpose of breathing to sort of bring oxygen in, but also produce carbon dioxide, which I'm excited to talk a little bit more about.
Yes, me too. Yeah,
as a way of helping supporting our system, and ultimately we are striving for balance in ourselves, not just in the way that we think, but also in our body, that homeostasis. And working with Tess and learning from Tess, I could see an opportunity for me to help other people. And that was really the aha moment. I thought, wow, people just don't look at breathing in this way. And I can see how this can really help everybody. And yes, and here I am today, hopefully working on my own breath as I'm speaking. Yes, we it's easy to take that big breath in as we're talking. And yes, but it's been quite a journey. And I thank you so much for your lovely compliment around what I don't know about movement isn't worth knowing. But I also am constantly curious, and I acknowledge through learning through my mentors along the years is that we just don't know what we don't know as well. So I'm always open to learning more and yeah, just being constantly curious, and that's what's brought me here today. So,
It has,
yay.
hasn't it? And it's such a lesson to us all, isn't it? That no matter where we are professionally, that it's really, if we get excited about learning something new, that we can go down that track. We can learn more. As you know, I'm doing the vagus nerve course at the moment, and I've thought about doing Tessa's course. I'm like, Jodie, just calm your farm. Just, finish one before you start the other. And I think that's why we get along so well, is because we both have such a passion for learning and then sharing what we know. And I just can't thank you enough for, for who you are and the way that you share. And you're so generous. And that day at CrossFit, I'll never forget, because I'm a classic overbreather. And in Tessa's book, she doesn't have any caveats around this. She said, if you struggle with anxiety, you don't breathe properly. And I'm the sort of person that usually kind of goes, oh, you might do this, or you may do that, or it's likely this, or it's possible that. But she's just like, this is so integral to our mental health. And it's such when we're not breathing properly, we're dysregulated with our breathing, or dysfunctional with our breathing. It can really contribute, but equally we can make changes, can't we? That are profound. And I did make a change, and it's only just recently that I've let go of the change that I made, and I've noticed the difference that I'm struggling with over breathing again. So I'm going to revisit and go back to sort of where I started. But please, if you could start to talk to us about the importance of carbon dioxide and oxygen balance, the balance between these really important gases, and perhaps building on from that as to why, when they're not in balance, it has such an effect on how we feel and function.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I think the one thing I just pick up on when you mentioned that is, we as humans are incredible. So when we are faced with life's stresses, I call it sometimes the kisses of time when I'm chatting around sort of the biomechanics, we will adapt and we will create strategies that serve us in that moment. The probably one failing of the brain is that sometimes it finds a strategy and says, okay, I'm going to run with this. And there may be better strategies. And with that breathing space, obviously at the point in time where there was, anxiety exists, of course, we're going to get our whole body on board and our brain on board to help support us in that moment. And then it just ticks over and becomes a habit. So for anyone that, is thinking, there's something wrong with my breathing, or there's a dysfunction in me, I think let's just spin that first of all and just say, wow, what a strategy that I put in place that was there to support me at that time. But now I'm hearing some things, and we all know that the body can change, we can change, the brain changes. Let's now explore this idea that we might be able to change that strategy that was serving us then, but isn't serving us anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the whole breathing piece is, there's so much misinformation out there about breathing, and people have an idea of what they think good breathing is. And one of the things that was a real aha moment for me when I took my base learning from university, from working with clients, respiratory, going through that sort of Pilates space into that sort of understanding pelvic floor diaphragm, was this idea that it's really about what your baseline is doing, the baseline breathing. Your physiological breathing is the way that I've termed that. So if everything's running as it should, and everything's as in that space of just, easy, rest and digest, parasympathetic, sort of normal space, that is where you'll be existing in this physiological breathing. And that's where I think it's really important for people to come back to. And from that, we can tag on different breathing practices that will have certain effects. And I imagine many of your listeners will have heard of Breathe by James Nestor, which is it's a lovely intro to breathing. And in that, he terms some of the breathing practices that people might be thinking of as their normal breathing or what their ideal breathing should be. And he calls them breathing plus. And they're definitely effective for the outcome that they're trying to achieve, but they're going to work a lot better when the person practicing them has their baseline breathing down pat.
Yes.
And baseline breathing or physiological breathing is the way that we would breathe, sort of use the word normal, but I'm not the biggest fan of that word,
Yeah.
but the way that we would breathe at that kind of ideal space. And it's easy breathing is the way that I like to refer to it. And it is all about the volume of breath that we are inhaling and exhaling. And so the volume of breath will determine a number of things. Now, with volume of breath, the way that the body has evolved to manage volume is it's got these two tiny little tubes that are in the middle of our face and part of our nose that brings the air through down into the lungs. And because you've got these two little narrow tubes or straws, if probably the best way of describing them, because there's this degree of resistance when we breathe in through our nose, that actually the diaphragm has to work, and it engages that diaphragm to help with that drawing in of the breath. And so that's your sort of volume management piece. And so you get this volume of air that then enters the lungs. Obviously in air, we have around 23, in the air around us, we have about 23% oxygen. So we breathe in, we take in the air, and roughly, I think it's around sort of 3% of oxygen is then taken in through the alveoli, transferred across into the blood, onto the hemoglobin, jumps on, and then it gets taken off and delivered to the cells. You know, knock knock on the cell door. Here's your food. Here's your energy, and oxygen goes in, does its thing, and then carbon dioxide pops out, like a magic trick. And then the carbon dioxide is in our blood and in our lungs, and then we exhale the carbon dioxide and the water, which is the outcome of breathing in oxygen. Now, we breathe out this carbon dioxide and that's gone. However, we don't breathe it all out. The remaining carbon dioxide is what helps determine how our state that we are in. So when I say state, I'm referring to your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, and those terms are becoming more well known. And Jodie, you know that certainly in the work that you do, and certainly with the vagus nerve work, in that when we're in our sympathetic state, we are fight or flight. You know, we are ready to go. You know, we've got the sort of hormones being released. We've got, you know, adrenaline, we've got cortisol, and we are getting, you know, we're getting out of there because there is a stressful situation we need to either remove ourselves from or fight, and hopefully not having to actually fight. And then you have the parasympathetic, which is like your rest and digest. So this is where cool, calm, everything's just, you know, tickety boo and ticking along just fine. And the carbon dioxide that's remaining in the lungs, there are receptors in the breathing center of the brain that will then measure how much carbon dioxide there is, and that will determine what the reaction is on that breath out. So when we're breathing in that sort of easy volume, like a sort of moderate volume in through the nose, and then breathing out that sort of easy volume, there's able to be a remaining amount of carbon dioxide that sits in the lungs, and that tells the brain, okay, we're in rest and digest, all's good here. Now, the other amazing things about carbon dioxide, which I'll just mention briefly now, I think carbon dioxide is actually the body's best kept secret.
Yes.
And it's interesting that, and this is where sort of that misunderstanding and the words, something I say to my kids is words have wings, so say nice things. And then to my students, when I'm sort of teaching kind of Pilates related courses to them, this idea of words have wings, so say things that actually are helpful because they land and people take on that information. And some of the words we've used around breathing has things like carbon dioxide is a waste gas, empty your lungs, you know, release the waste gases. And I think if there's one thing that people can take away from this chat, hopefully there's more than one thing.
Yes.
But if there's one thing they can take away is that actually carbon dioxide is a really, really important chemical within our body, and it has so many roles, and they're pretty fascinating, really. You know, when you think about it, it's just being one chemical, you know. And so carbon dioxide again helps with that regulation of our sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's actually a buffer that helps manage our pH, and pH is very sensitive within our body and within our system, and it needs to be maintained at a specific level. and carbon dioxide helps to do that. It also works as a way, it's a relaxant. So its goal, it's in our body to help relax us. And so with that relaxation, it's relaxing the smooth muscles in the walls of our airways, in our bladder, in our uterus, in our GI tract. And also as I always say we are effectively a walking pharmacy. Effectively, carbon dioxide is a bronchodilator and also acts as an antihistamine. So it's got those roles there. And carbon dioxide also, think of it as like the bus driver for hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the molecule that oxygen attaches to. And then carbon dioxide levels in the blood is what determines when oxygen gets released. So the level of carbon dioxide, and I simplify it by saying the carbon dioxide is the bus conductor, but effectively when the hemoglobin is delivering oxygen to the cells, it is the level of carbon dioxide in the blood that will determine whether that oxygen is delivered or not. So when someone's exercising, and this is what I talk to my sports people that come and want to talk about the breathing side of things, is actually you're going to get better delivery of oxygen into your cells if you are able to breathe in such a way that allows your carbon dioxide to remain and be present and not blown off, if you like. So
yes.
that's actually there's a fancy term for that, and it's called the Bohr effect.
BOHR.
BOHR, yes, and it's not boring. The fun fact of the day. And so it's a really and so I think when we think of breathing, we think, okay, we need to get our oxygen on board, and yes, oxygen is important. There is a lot of oxygen in the air that's available for us. 3% of that is taken from the air when we breathe in, and actually we make around 6% carbon dioxide. So you can sort of see how carbon dioxide is important because of the level that we make, so that we can still blow off some, but actually the retained carbon dioxide is what's providing that homeostasis in our bodies.
And one of the things that you just said, and thank you for that really comprehensive summary, because I think a lot of listeners, a lot of this information will be really new. And like what you said, that we think about carbon dioxide as a waste gas. Sometimes when people are conducting breathing exercises, they'll say breathe in the good, breathe out the bad, or just this idea that it's unimportant. And I want to sort of also circle back to when you said about the way that carbon dioxide helps to maintain relaxation in the smooth muscles. And one of the symptoms of anxiety can be frequent trips to the loo, frequent urination. And when the carbon dioxide balance is imbalanced, then it can cause more tension in the smooth muscles, which causes more tension in the bladder, which means you need to go to the toilet more often. And so I think it's quite fascinating. And I want to ask you another question. And that question is, for me, for example, with this, dysfunctional sort of breathing that I have, and that I've talked about, this over breathing, and that includes yawning when I'm not tired and sighing. I mean, I've been in the supermarket and somebody will say to me, "Oh, that was a big sigh," and I haven't really even realised I've looking for the right yogurt in the dairy aisle, and haven't even sort of realised. And so breathing and anxiety have sort of been hand in hand, a challenge and I didn't know that I could sort of separate them and make a difference the way that I have. And I think I said earlier that my breathing, it's a very anxious time of the year for me, and we're recording this prior to Christmas, and so I feel like I've got more balls in the air than I would like to have at the moment. So I've let go of what I was doing to manage my breathing, which made such a powerful difference. So could you please talk to us about the volume of breath and why people like me with anxiety, we tend to take in too much oxygen? It's like too much of what we think is a good thing, isn't it?
Yes. And I think, and first off, I'm just going to circle back around on the dysfunctional breathing statement. And I know that it's a real common word that we use to describe something that's going on with someone. But I also want to acknowledge how incredible you are, Jodie, not just you are, but also obviously your system and how it's found a strategy that at the time it was necessary to help you. And you've just fallen back a little bit into that strategy.
Yeah.
But you know that there's opportunities in that. Now, the interesting thing, I guess, with, anxiety and breathing being a habit, 20,000 to 30,000 breaths, a day we do. And so you can see how we're going to embed this strategy fairly quickly if it's come on at a stressful time for us, or, there's lots of causes for anxiety and there's lots of causes for the over breathing strategy. And the interesting thing is, and I liken this to, back in the day, maybe a million years ago. I'm not entirely sure historically wise when we were first existing, but when we were cave people, we had a very similar brain to the one we do now. I mean, there's a little bit more frontal, but certainly our sort of primal brain is fairly similar. And so we would be hanging out in our cave, or we'd go out for a wander and we'd see a hairy mammoth.
Yeah.
And that hairy mammoth would be coming towards us and we would be like, I need to get away. And hopefully you're not going to go into freeze. Hopefully you're not going to fight. You're going to take some breaths in, because that breath in is going to start to bring the oxygen to the cells because they need to action. And then the blowing off will actually then tell the brain, okay, we are in fight or flight. We need to get adrenaline. We need to get cortisol. We need to get out of here. Come on, let's do this. Go. And so thank goodness we have this in place that allows us to see something that's danger and get us away as quick as we can. And we know the impacts of adrenaline. We've seen mothers lift cars, their children were trapped underneath. Like, this is a power, this is a powerful resource we have in our system. And so you've now run away from this hairy mammoth and you're hiding behind a rock. The hairy mammoth's headed off and you're starting to now calm down. So then the breathing, it take a little while, and it does take a while with that sort of after that big event for the breathing to start to calm down, and then you fall back into that rest and digest space. And so that's your normal. So your breathing pattern has returned. There was a demand for it to be increased, but now that's gone. Fast forward to now, and yes, the lead up to Christmas, I think most people's cups were already pretty full.
Yeah.
And now we've got that sort of cream on top of Christmas and everything. All of a sudden it was like, wow, it wasn't as busy as I thought it could be, because now I'm even busier. And we've got hairy mammoths everywhere, but they're not real. They're not, they don't exist anymore. They've obviously extinct, but there's a hairy mammoth in the notifications that come up on your phone. There's a hairy mammoth as you realize that you are slowly missing the window to get presents delivered.
Yes.
You need to jump on again. There's a lot, and they're all hairy mammoths. And those hairy mammoths are putting us into this sort of flight or fight response fairly constantly. And because we are incredible, and because we adapt, and because we are this system that can adapt and can make some subtle changes to accommodate where we're at, we've just had accommodation after accommodation. And so the breathing center in the brain has responded to the level of carbon dioxide, and it's just created that state of where things are. So when we are feeling anxious, the breath in is that response. It's that limbic response. The amygdala is saying, okay, we got to get things going. We take that breath in. The carbon dioxide then is levels are then fed into the breathing center of the brain, and it's all go. And we put ourselves into that state, and it's not on purpose. A lot of this is happening unconsciously, and the breath, and this is where Tess, can confidently make that statement that when there's emotional and psychological components to our anxiety, and it's very real. And one of the incredible things about what you're doing, Jodie, with this podcast is we're inviting it with us. We're making it welcome, and it can be here, and it's not being pushed away, and we're exploring it and helping people to come understand where it comes from. And so there's also these physical components to it, and that physicality really does show itself in the breath. So there's just adaptation that's occurred around that breath, and it's feeding that sort of sympathetic nervous system in that way. And something that I used to say 10 years ago was this idea of taking a deep breath when people were stressed. Oh, just take a deep breath. And actually that deep breath, if it's continued, falls into that over breathing category. And so it's interesting, the terms that we use and the way that we default to these responses, that actually that can create that sense of anxiety and panic in people when we're starting to invite more breath. And so for you, falling on these sighs and these sort of more volume of breath, it's like a default chicken or egg scenario in that feeling a bit more stressed. There's a strategy that you already had in play. There was a demand for you to kind of be a little bit more in that kind of, okay, fight or flight. And fight or flight probably should just be termed busy. I think for all of us, it needs to be, because I think people think, oh, fight or flight, I don't relate to that. But actually just being busy and go. And I for most people that I speak to, they go. And that's that. We are calling on our reserves to be doing that. And that's sort of how I describe it to people. And the Tess has a list of symptoms that she has people just go through and say, yep, I get that. And where I've sort of have a similar survey that I send out to clients. And a lot of people are like, oh, is that related to that? And it's this idea that, everything stops and starts with the breath. Ultimately it's our first breath through to our last breath. That's our life force.
Yes.
And we are incredible. We'll adapt. And that adaptation around the pH, when the carbon dioxide isn't in an ideal space, the kidneys will start to take some of the pressure off, and then we'll sort of start to see these other things. So, and you touched on the bladder, and actually when we are, with anxiety, we're also going to get increased tone in the pelvic floor. So there's all these things that are going to connect to us in that space. And I think coming back to the, obviously where you're noticing these, this way of breathing, there's really nice, and this is where Tess's work for me was a big aha, because I think I had looked at breathing at these extremes where it was encouraged to do these certain style of breathing where you were sort of stressing your system to help it. And her work is this sort of subtle breathing approach, and it really resonated with me, because we are such an amazing, we're so intricate in our makeup, and when we try and force something on the body or the brain, it can reverberate back. And so I think the subtlety of awareness into the breathing is that sort of first step, and then it's starting to find ways to encourage that sort of easy breathing, that low volume of breath that comes in and comes out. And one of the statements I'll say to clients when the concept is first sort of shared with them is this idea: you have all the breath you need. There's 23% oxygen in the air and you only need 3%. So it's coming back to that place and just noticing, bringing the attention to the nose breathing again, if that's comfortable. If it's not, there's other strategies just around encouraging just a slightly smaller volume of air for that person.
I've taken already so much from what you said, and I love the way that you share it, and you're such a teacher at heart. And I know that you do a lot of teaching to fellow professionals, and obviously with your clients, of which I have been one in the past and will continue to be, of course. But just this notion, I think they're just hearing you say, you've got all the breath you need, you've got all the air you need, that in itself is calming. And yes, so I loved how you'd said about that easeful breathing, and the strategy that I put into place, we might be able to talk about a little bit later, that made a profound difference. In all my life, I never knew the difference it could make to put this strategy in. It was the cloud one, so I might get you to talk about that a bit later. But I want to go back to this idea of breathing through the nose. And I know when I read James Nestor's Breathe that he taped his mouth. Well, first of all, he pegged his nose and was a mouth breather for a while and had the most phenomenal changes to his physiology and his health and his mental health in particular, and then switched to some mouth taping at night to breathe and just be a nose breather. So for listeners who are curious like I am about why it makes such a difference, can you help us understand?
Yes, absolutely. And I think just coming back to your comment around that sort of vagus nerve and the, connection into all of that is one of my, it's almost a tagline, everything is connected, and so that's where, the exercise and the breathing education can have such a profound effect. So nose breathing is how our body evolved us to exist as we do now. And I interchange the word evolve with design, but ultimately there was an evolution that got us to here. And I do just look at the design of us and think, wow, what a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And the nose is small in the sense of the airway size to bring air into the lungs. It'll be challenging for you to take in a high volume of air through your nose versus your mouth. It's going to be a lot easier for you to breathe in a large volume through your mouth versus through your nose. So the nose serves that purpose. Now, in our nose, we also have the little hairs that help to filter the air as it comes through. So that's one of the benefits there. And there's also nitrous oxide. And James Nestor, I do recommend anyone that hasn't read James's book to have a read of that, because he's a very good storyteller when he talks about breath. And this nitrous oxide is an incredible chemical again within our body that has these amazing benefits. But it's also just around that the tone and allowing the air to come through. And then, like I said, because we've got these narrow airways, that then helps the diaphragm to work and to bring the breath in, because it's having to work against that little bit of resistance. Most people can subscribe to the idea of a breath in through the nose. However, again, this is that comment around the words that have been used. A lot of people, it's certainly in that exercise and movement space, it's out through the mouth. And you see people doing that in gyms, in Pilates studios, yoga studios, and the out through the mouth strategy or technique, there were some elements of it that were utilized to benefit an exercise. For example, the breath out, if you can tap your obliques will come on there as well. However, there's no sort of real absolute breathing out through the mouth serves this, and this. And so it's something we've just adopted over time. And so the breath out through the nose is as important as the breath in, but I'd say almost maybe a little bit more important in the sense of it's managing the amount of air that we blow out. And so it's managing how much carbon dioxide we blow out. And remember that the level of carbon dioxide in our lungs is what tells our brain the state that we're in. And so if we're breathing out through our nose, we're actually going to limit the amount of air that can come out. The interesting, I guess, when we breathe out through the nose, when we take in oxygen gets broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And so if we're breathing out through our nose, we're obviously managing the volume. If we're breathing out through our mouth, we're going to be blowing off a lot more of the carbon dioxide and the water. So people will get thirsty if they're mouth breathing more, and so there's these sort of components where there's a statement that says we should drink 8 glasses of water a day. Well, actually it should really correlate with how we're breathing as to how much fluid we need to onboard, because if we're breathing out a lot through our mouth, we're going to be breathing out a lot more water and we'll need to take on more water, versus if you're nose breathing and in that easy breathing space, you probably need less water because there's less being blown off.
Makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And I remember at training one day, you were working on breathing through your nose, and through your nose sort of as an exhalation, you were really working on developing that. And I tried it. I found it so hard, particularly as my oxygen needs increased as I was exercising more and working hard cardiovascularly and lifting weights. And I found that I felt like it was almost anxiety provoking trying to breathe through my nose and keep my mouth shut. And eventually I just had to open my mouth just to sort of let it out to feel like I could find that equilibrium again. So how do you go when you're training? Because I know you're not only a CrossFit buddy of mine, but you're a cyclist and you're a runner, and you are obviously working with athletes as well as with other professionals who work with athletes. How does everyone go with this transition to nasal breathing at all times if possible?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's highlighted to me a statement that I want to make before, in that in breathing retraining or breathing education, it always has to feel comfy. So within comfort, but with curiosity. And so that awareness is the first part really of any work that I do with a client. Breathing, movement, feet, core, Pilates, it's bringing awareness. And what I encourage listeners to do if they're hearing this and think, oh, right, that's it, nose breathing, because I know for those that may suffer from anxiety are also like highly driven and focused. And I just want to say, it's not tomorrow you're not going to go and suddenly that's it, I'm doing my nose breathing 24/7. It's in collaboration with your body, and it's on the terms of a partnership, a body, brain and mind, heart, all of the elements within us. And nose breathing, first is this sort of idea of awareness, and then it's volume, trying to manage the volume. And nose breathing is a wonderful way of managing the volume, as we've referred to already. And so for people that are wanting to start, it's that bringing awareness, noticing what your breathing strategies are. So if you're sighing, if you're coughing, if you're kind of yawning, all of those sort of breathing strategies that are onboarding this higher volume of air. And then it's from there, it's starting to nose breathe. And, if for those that are listening are sitting down right now, maybe you might want to just notice how that feels. And if you've gone to take a few nose breaths in and out and you've gone, oh, wow, this is really hard, this is not for me, then it's not for you just yet. And if you're doing this and you think, oh yeah, I can do this. And we one of the things I'll measure with clients is their nose breathing tolerance. So for some people, they can only nose breathe for 10 seconds at the start. And for others, no problem. That's what their default might be. And a question that I ask clients is always, would you say you are a nose breather 100% of the time, 10% of the time? And so it's that information that guides me as to how easy it will be for them to nose breathe when on command. And so for those of you that think you are a more of a mouth breather, it's going to feel very different for you when you start nose breathing. So just go at this very slowly. And, Tess, who is my mentor in this space and who I feel I've learned so much from, does have, a book where she'll talk about this side of things. So ultimately that could be a nice option to reach for. But in terms of that nose breathing, it's very slow. And for athletes that I've worked with, it's a conversation about, so effectively you'll need to go a bit slower for 3 weeks. And that can be a big, they're like, oh no. And so it's a bit of a negotiation around the timing of that. And, it's interesting, Jodie, you talked about how, you did these exercises and you sort of, that you need to go back to them. Well, I actually feel the same in that as well. I feel like I need to go back to do my exercises to continue to improve. But when I had the learnings from Tess and I started the journey of nose breathing and getting myself into that ideal physiological sort of baseline breathing pattern, I would just bring awareness to it through the day. I would do a walk on the flat surface and bring awareness to it. I then went into walking up a hill, and then from there I started. So it was a very slow process of building that. Just like with anything where we're learning something new, we're going to create the foundations and go very slowly to help ourselves adapt to that. And where you saw me was probably a few months into me actually having done all that other breathing work, and then now bringing that into the space, into the CrossFit, into my riding, into my running. and starting to really tap into that resource. And it's made a big difference for me, certainly as a calming, and just I can run longer, I can ride longer, and yeah, I definitely feel the benefits for myself, but it's a slow process.
It's a slow process. Thank you for really reinforcing this idea that it is about, like with anything, when we're learning something new or we're making change, starting small and building and progressing from where we're at. And like you say, some of your clients will be sort of nose breathing most of the time, some will be hardly nose breathing, and sometimes, and we won't dive down this path today, but of course some listeners will have sinus challenges and colds and various reasons why breathing through their nose is quite a challenge. And I really would encourage you, if that is the case for you, to reach out to Eva to talk about what you can do, because there are strategies and there are pathways that you can go down with some professional help to make a difference, which will make a difference to you psychologically as well as physically. I love how you've talked about making gradual change, and it's the same with anything. We don't want to dive into the deep end. We want to just dip our toe in the water and start from where we're at. And I mentioned earlier the cloud exercise, which I haven't explained. I wonder if you could explain that for our listeners, and just share a practical idea or two as to what people who are keen to be curious about this and to trial an idea or two, where they might start.
Great. And I'll absolutely do that. I just want to really reinforce this idea of if you have anxiety, the breathing practice that you do must always be within comfort. So please go slowly, explore this, be curious. And I would discourage you from trying some sort of advanced breathing practices that someone might have recommended. Oh, you should do this. It's great. It's I felt all these amazing feelings. If it's actually stressing your sympathetic nervous system. So start very gently. The awareness piece is very important. And the cloud exercise is something that Tess talks about she refers to these sort of healthy habits of breathing. And so that's integral to how I help with the breathing education. And this cloud exercise is, and you can be nose breathing or mouth breathing if nose breathing, as you said, Jodie, is difficult for you at the moment, and that's okay. It's just around that volume of air. And so if we imagine this cloud, so you've got that line underneath and then the sort of circles over the top of that cloud, and in a day, that's the breath that we take is effectively in this cloud. So from 24 hours, effectively, if we think 12 hours because we're sleeping for 8, but in that time we've got this amount of air that we breathe. And so this cloud exercise is really around, over the course of a day, can your volume of breath reduce subtly, just 5% over the course of the day? And for some people that can be like, they sort of look at me and say, what? It's a cloud and I'm breathing. And so it's just, when it comes to your attention, when you think about your breathing, is just to take a moment and to let it feel like a little bit less. And it's not restrictive practice. This is just very much of, the cloud. So I'm going to just try and breathe a little bit less when I think about it over the duration of the day. And in that time, we start to just give the brain an experience of what it is to have this sort of regular breathing pattern, this easy breathing where the volume's in, the volume's out. It's not a big sigh here and these kind of things. So it's just this idea of easy breathing and just 5% less over what you would have over the course of the day, and just starting to bring that awareness in. I would just encourage listeners to just explore that, see how that feels. Again, if it's not comfortable, then it's not for you just yet. Play around with bringing awareness to your nose breathing. I will just say there's a lot of people that have tried taping their mouth as well. And I'm not to say that's a definite no. However, with breathing education, when we can start to change your breathing patterns during the day, sort of 20,000 breaths, what will often be the case is that nose breathing will occur at night as a result. If you're taping your mouth, what can happen is you're taping your mouth, so you're needing to nose breathe. However, you may not be changing that habit, because when you take the tape off, it may not have integrated from your daytime breathing into the nighttime breathing. And if you try taping your mouth and it feels uncomfortable, that is an absolute no. It needs to come off and go back to that. Go back a step and just start to bring awareness to your breathing and nose breathing as comfortable. So it's always with this work and the way that I approach it and the way that Tess approaches it, and that makes the most sense in my head is this sort of subtle collaboration with the body and brain. We're not forcing everything. This no pain, no gain needs to just, again, vocabulary that can just get put in the bucket that we're not going to refer to anymore. And we're going to work and just bring awareness and sort of self-compassion really in terms of how we practice the breathing.
Oh, Eva, just the way that you operate and the compassion and kindness and subtle ways that you help bring change for people are really why I wanted to bring you on the podcast. And, it's an excuse to have a really good chat about all the things that we love talking about, of course, but just the way you share. And I think just this kindness to self and this idea that we just invite these changes, we get curious about them, we trial, we see how we feel, we want to be comfy, nothing's forced. And I really appreciate you emphasizing that. And I just want to share to listeners as a person who really has lived with anxiety more or less my whole life, and that breathing challenges have been a really integral part of that journey. I'll never forget, like, just growing up was just, I can't breathe properly, Mum, I can't get a full breath. It's just this lack of satisfaction. Like, I never felt like I had enough oxygen. And the difference practicing that cloud exercise made for me in a matter of 48 hours, no exaggeration, it was just like, oh my goodness, it's like, where has this knowledge and understanding been all my life? And I made that change, and it was just about stifling a yawn a little here and there if I could. It was about recognizing a sigh and maybe just where I could, without forcing anything, just slightly, ever so slightly, reducing that volume. And the change was profound, and it was within a very short space of time. And as I've lost that awareness and approaching a time which is very traditionally, Christmas has been very anxiety provoking for me, very triggering time for me. And I'm enjoying this Christmas more than any other, Eva. I am really excited and really enjoying so much about it, but also the mental load and the to-do list is just ginormous. And so I've lost that awareness. So I think this conversation today is really going to help me bring more awareness, and even preparing to talk to you, it returned my awareness to the breath. So really invite our listeners to just be curious and to put something into motion, just a little something, a little nugget from what you've heard Eva talk about today. Eva, we are out of time, and there's so much more I wanted to ask, but I wonder, would you be a guest on the podcast? Would you be a guest for me on the podcast again sometime, please?
Oh, it would be an honour. Thank you. And yes, I just love chatting with you, Jodie.
Oh, thank you, Eva, so much. And so before we part ways, how can people work with you, please? Where can they find you online on the World Wide Web and learn more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing?
Thank you. Yes. Well, if you do have any questions that's popped up from today, I'd love to hear them and see how I can answer them for you more directly. You can get in touch with me via my website. So that's havemovement.com.au. I tend to hang around Instagram as well. So that hashtag is havemovement. You can go through the contact page there. My email is also available on my website, and I do love questions. Send me over some questions. I'll do my very best to answer them for you.
Oh, you are brilliant. You are brilliant. I'm so grateful for you and very appreciative of you sharing your time with us here on the podcast today. Thank you so much, Eva.
Thank you, Jodie. And thanks so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you for joining us today. I really would love to know what you've learned and what you've taken away from this episode. As always, please share with us. We love to know that what we're sharing here on the podcast is making a difference for you or for someone that you care about. So jump onto Instagram and find Eva at Have Movement, and you'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Let us know what you think, and please share this episode with other people in your life who you know will benefit from learning more about their breathing, their patterns, and some of the changes that they can begin to become curious about. I cannot wait to be back with you next week with another episode of the podcast. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.